Hello everyone, my name is Matt Wood and I'm the Engagement Director for Moving Parts Newcastle Puppetry Festival. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so excited to welcome you to the second event in our 2021 Talks with Practitioners series, a conversation with Lesley-anne Rose. This event is produced by Moving Parts Arts as part of Newcastle Puppetry Festival 2021. We believe puppetry is for everyone, which is why free and subsidised theatre is central to what we do. Our entire online programme this year is Pay What You Feel to make sure that everyone can access theatre and puppetry no matter their circumstances. Since 2017, our award-winning festival, community projects and puppet school have trained young people and adults, given opportunities to artists and reached tens of thousands of audience members with the magic of puppetry. But we cannot cover the costs of running these events without your support. We need to raise a further £2,000 to break even on our costs, so if you can, please donate now to support this event and the rest of our programme. The link to donate is movingpartsarts.com/donate, or you can click the handy donate here button below if you're joining us on Crowdcast. The suggested donation for this event is £8, but please give whatever you can afford. In a small organisation like ours, every penny really does count. So thank you so much for donating. Just before we get started and welcome Lesley-anne to your screens, I'll just let you know about some of the highlights from our upcoming festival programme. So there are 2 more Talks with Practitioners events coming up over the next few weeks. Next week we have Nick Palmer of Noisy Oyster, who will join us on Tuesday the 10th of August to talk about 3D printed puppetry. And the following week we have Star Wars film and TV puppeteer Brian Herring, who will close the talks programme on Tuesday the 17th of August. And make sure to check out the 2 remaining Scratch Stream events where artists from around the world will premiere brand new puppet theatre performances. The next one is this coming Friday the 6th of August at 7 p.m, featuring artists from Brazil, Hull, Bangor and Finland. The final stream is on Friday the 13th of August and will feature artists from Powys, the Netherlands and York. And details of all of these can be found at movingpartsarts.com/what's on. Last but not least, you might have heard about our most ambitious project to date, Tyne Rising, an outdoor theatre spectacle for all the family at City Stadium, Newcastle at the end of August. The River Tyne has overflown its banks, mysterious creatures and unknown forces are unleashed. The people of Tyneside must search their souls and work together to find out how to bring the world back into balance. Through giant puppets, costumed ensembles, live music and landscape spectacles led by Thingamajig Theatre's Andrew Kim, this live 1 weekend only performance will be a memorable outdoor experience for extraordinary times. Live in-person tickets have now been booked up for Tyne Rising, but you can still watch the performance by signing up to our online stream, which will be aired on the 31st of August at 7 p.m. And the link for that is movingpartsarts.com/Tyne Rising. And if you're in Newcastle, we are still looking for volunteers to make the event happen. Be part of the largest puppet show Newcastle has ever seen by signing up today at movingpartsarts.com/volunteer. Get a free team t-shirt, catered lunch and watch the show for free. So during the talk with Lesley-anne this evening, please do get involved. If you would like to ask Lesley-anne something, please click the Ask a Question button on the bottom bar of your screens or just type in the chat. We can't promise to have time for all questions, but we will do our best. And our festival director, Karen, is managing the questions in the chat, so make sure you say hi and interact there. And if you're watching on Facebook, you can comment in the stream as we're keeping an eye there too. So that's the admin out of the way. Without further ado, let's go to the reason that we're all here, Lesley-anne Rose, who's an independent filmmaker specialising in stop-motion puppet animation based in Newcastle Upon Tyne. As well as having an interest in bizarre and surreal stories, Lesley-anne works with people from diverse and underrepresented communities to tell the stories less commonly told. teach animation basics, and show people how they can be an agent in their own work that is theirs rather than based on them. Lesley-anne is currently making a BFI-funded short film, has made commissions for broadcast TV and BBC learning sites, as well as the BALTIC Centre for Contemporary Art, Tate Britain, GemArts, the NHS Trust, Newcastle University and other cultural organisations in the UK. Lesley-anne was also the first recipient of the Moving Parts Stop Motion Commission back in 2017. And here is Lesley-anne Rose. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good after that. That was really good. Like, I feel sort of like pepped up, ready to go.
Very professional introduction. Well, it's a delight to have you. And I guess to start, it would be great if you could just give a little introduction to you and how you got interested in stop motion puppetry, I think, first of all. And that kind of journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I'll try not to go on tangents and go too far off. I didn't study animation. I'm from a fine art background, but my two interests from fine art were photography and sculpture. So they're both of those things kind of like segue really nicely into stop motion animation. And I quite liked, I was a big fan of Jan Spankmajer. People don't know his work. It's worth having a look. He's like a real master of the surreal in terms of stop motion. And the work is really interesting. And I thought I'd kind of have a go teaching myself. So it's been a bit of a long journey in terms of technique. I love the sculptural side. That part's really important to me. It kind of feels like that's, where I kind of came from and then went into making films. I always wondered whether maybe I was a bit too much of a megalomaniac to work in live action because I can control the puppets. No, do what I say. So, and I think that the fact that I've got a background in photography as well means that things like lighting a set, I really enjoy that part of it. So making all of the objects kind of pop out and stand out and look really lovely. And then I was doing a lot of workshops and then started to be confident enough to offer animation workshops. So I worked a lot doing a lot of community art projects. I did some fantastic stuff, like amazing commissions that I'm still really proud of today. And the people who were involved in it, I feel like got a lot from those animations and being able to kind of like take control, but learn a bit of skills as well. And at the moment I teach at Teesside University. So I teach onto the 2D and stop motion animation course there. So I kind of give people I try to give them the education that I would have liked if I would have studied it at degree. So it's a real mixture, but also tries to kind of feed into that, like how it would work in industry and what it's like to work with other people, but how quick you have to be at some things. Because I think it's nice when you're a student, but like when you're working in the industry, you don't get a lot of time. People still kind of have this idea that animation takes like 2 weeks. Sorry, I was waiting for the next question.
It's quite right. I was just enjoying this this journey, and yes, particularly this kind of perception of like how long animation takes, and you touched on it there, that actually as an animator you're taking on all these different roles in a way, because you're doing the lighting, you're doing the I don't know, that does the editing process kind of come in at that point?
If I'm doing community workshops, I'll edit myself, but on the bigger projects, I have a kind of professional editor, because it's really nice to have somebody, who that is strongly what they do as their career to come in, because I'm kind of one of those people who can do a lot of things, but not all of them at the top of my game. So some things I'm like, I can do this brilliantly, but, someone else could do it much better.
Right. And then how does an editing process work as an animator? Because obviously you are, I guess there's some sort of pre-edit if you're working with storyboards, but then there's a post-edit as well. So how does that work?
It's a really interesting kind of flexibility that I still sometimes feel like, even with myself, I'm like, oh, we won't have extra footage, so there won't be that much to cut. But then when we start filming, there is always a bit of extra footage. I think there's just sometimes you're working with a set and a puppet, and you're like, oh, do you know what? It would be quite nice if this happened here. And then you animate it, and then it might end up in the final edit, or it might not make it in. But sometimes it makes kind of sense when you're shooting it. You're kind of like, oh, this would make a nice little like section piece. But also sometimes you need cutaways. So if you're on the main piece of the set, because one of the things that's really hard to do if you film a long bit of animation, so say you're doing like, I don't know, a couple of thousand frames, and during that time something alters slightly, you need to be able to cut away and come back. So if you stay on it, everyone will notice it. But if you cut away to something else, no one will notice that there's been a very slight change. And because you're filming over days or weeks or months, you need those cutaways. So when you're writing it, so it ends up, for me, first it's a storyboard, and then there's an animatic, which is like a film made out of the storyboard. Then there's a more detailed animatic, and then there's a script as well. So normally at that stage, I have a good idea what could go into the script. So that's probably an odd way around, different from live action. And then when we're shooting, the animators and the editor and everybody will use the script and the animatics for reference. And then sometimes I'll update. So at the moment I'm busy, it's in two parts, this film, and I'm busy updating part 2, because from the first animatic there's a couple of things that I realized that I didn't think were very clear. So I'm changing slightly, but things I can add in easily that aren't going to take, a whole massive scene, to be able to just put one little clue in to make sure everybody knows exactly what's going on. Because that's sometimes what people have said when they watch my films, is like, I loved it, but I didn't really know what was supposed to be happening. And I'm like, maybe they're in my head really clear, but they're not 100% clear. So I'll try and make sure that it's quite clear what is going on. And this, as usual, this one I'm making now is slightly surreal, and I just need to make sure everybody understands what's happened at a certain point, so that the second half of the film they're like, oh, I see. So I'm trying to like make that really clear.
So it's not set in stone at the kind of animatic stage or the storyboard stage. There's
not for me, but I think like with other people and probably with big companies, that is maybe is how it works. But I've never worked as part of a big animation company. I also feel like some of the stuff that I've seen from the way it works with like Disney and Pixar is that there seems to be quite a fluidity around that. The storyboard and the animatic as it's being made as well. So I think I get the impression that that is with most companies, that they're kind of constantly updating and changing. And sometimes there'll be parts of the story that they think, we don't need that bit anymore, because it's the time really, like we were saying, like it has to be made over time, and the time is expensive. So if you're like, actually we could get across the idea that this has happened by putting a letter in or a piece of paper or a flyer instead of like having a scene, because that will like cost us less money and we're able to move on in the film. So I think that there's probably elements of that all the way through. And then obviously some scenes need sometimes like the one I was saying, where like somebody goes to be part of a medical trial in mine, and that has a big impact on their life. So I need to make it super clear that's what's happening. And I think from the first animatic, I wasn't sure that was clear what was going on. So it's like, all right, I just need to make sure that the audience knows what's going on here. So, and I think I think that is quite common, but I'm probably a bit less nailed down than maybe other people. Who knows?
So let's show some, because you've got some of the puppets from the show that you're working on at the moment. Would you be happy to share some of those?
Yeah, I've got a couple of puppets. So I've had a lovely assistant called Iris who's been working with me, and we were making all of the puppets, and the sets are all made out of like packaging that came during lockdown, because I wanted to make a reference to the fact that we had this whole shift in like how we might consider the world, and I'd never been an internet shopper before, and then it came with loads of packaging, and I was like, actually I might make the whole project out of used items. So this is one of there's a classroom scene. This is one of the school kids. And Iris made this one and I love it. And there's this little eyes, and and this is florist's wire here, and this is like old kind of packaging and newspaper. And then I really like his little feet and his bendy stomach. He's been kind of blown. They all get blown across the room by a sneeze, and so they're all crumpled in a heap, which is why he's in this kind of position. But he is quite bendy. But it's quite hard to move. Like, they don't have a massive amount of flexibility because of that. So for some of the puppets, I had to make replacement bodies because they wouldn't move as much as I needed. So I was like, I'll have to make another body. So the main character is called Frannie. So the young Frannie has 3 different bodies in different positions because it would just break the puppets. And I've got another school child here as well. I think Iris made this one as well. And I love his like kind of little shorts and his little legs. You can see he's got his like old magazines and newspapers on his legs under there. Yeah, and then I think I've used this really, really expensive nail varnish to get the black on the eyes because it didn't chip. So when I was buying the nail varnish, the woman was saying, "Do you want to sign up for this like Yves Saint Laurent thing?" And I didn't want to say to her, "I'm just buying the nail varnish to paint puppet eyes," because I thought she'd think I was weird. So yeah, that's what they look like, and they all have this look in the film.
Amazing. Well, and I've got a little time lapse from how it looks as you're animating. Yeah, so what's the scene?
Oh, so there's a library scene. So this is the older character, well, the same character but older in part 2, and she's lonely and she's trying to make friends. So she's in the library, and there's a kind of idea that this character throughout the film is like quite awkward. I didn't want to make somebody that looked a bit like a Disney princess or had anything to do with that storyline. So it's not that. And also I wrote it pre the pandemic, and so she does wear a mask, but it's because she has allergies. And in it, obviously then the pandemic happened, and I was like, oh, it looks like I've made a film about COVID. And I had to make these tiny little masks to go on. So this is in the library where she's trying to make a friend.
Amazing. That's great. Let me get the other, because I think there's another angle here.
Yeah, and I realised I move my face around loads when I'm animating.
Yeah, is it odd watching yourself back?
It's really weird. I'm like, what am I doing with my face?
So just for these are like 30-second time lapses. How long is this taking in reality?
It's probably taking me a good sort of, I think, a good 30-40 minutes. Because what you can't see, which would be nice to capture at another time, it is kind of like how much, because as you're moving the puppets, like in the software, I'm playing everything I've shot so far back to make sure that it looks smooth, the animation. So in between each shot, there's quite a lot of time where I'm playing it all back, and also you go backwards and forwards between the frames to see if it's too much of a jump, because it can be quite tricky to get the speed right. So sometimes like you don't want something to look like it's suddenly kind of jolted and like moved a lot. So it's trying to get that smoothness in there. So you have to kind of like look back over what you've done and go through it. So that's what I'm doing there. And the puppets are quite secure in this one. In the last scene I was doing, they were sat on a bus and they were wobbling around a lot, and I had to pause all the time, and sort of like they had magnets sticking them to the set, and I had to pause and kind of like clean the magnets and stick them down and put loads of white tack underneath them and try and get them restuck to the set. But in this one, they're quite solidly staying there, which has been quite good. They're not wobbling around too much, because you have that as well, where you'll be animating and you get unwanted movement, and that's a bit of a killer. And there's also sometimes there's like a bit of unwanted light changing, so you kind of like, oh, there's a bit of light spill or something going on, and so you'll have to like start again, or decide whether you can cut away at that point and come back to it once you've fixed the light problem. Yeah,
Right.
and you can see all the kind of like, because they're talking, the main character's talking. So there's all mouth sets and eyelids under the table, which I'm swapping the mouths as they're talking, and the eyelids are made of plasticine, because I couldn't make them out of paper mache where they looked right to be on, and they were too small. Because things out of paper mache are lovely, but once you start getting to small sizes, it's really difficult to get them to look right. So ended up using some plasticine for those. So that's all my kind of like, there's always quite an interesting blast zone around the set of like the tools and the eyelids and the mouths that are coming off and on. And if somebody comes in, they're like, what's all this? And you're like, it's eyelids.
So just a reminder to our audience that if you have any questions for Lesley-anne, then please do let us know. We have her for a good few more minutes now, so please do put your questions there in the chat. You were talking a bit about the materials and the choice of materials. And why specifically paper for this project? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so in the story, in the concept of the story, there's the film is called Type, and there's a big reference to her finding her an old typewriter in the shed and typing onto the typewriter. So there's that kind of paper element, and type also refers to, you know, at the end of it there's a love letter. So the second half of it is based on the love letter that she's writing, but you don't know who it's to. And then obviously, like, we have that thing about the that I mentioned about the lockdown packaging, because you can see under the table, you can kind of see that it's all made out of card. And I have like a lovely set maker who makes all of the. So I will say, I want it to look like this, and then I give them piles of card and paper, and they're kind of like making it look like something else. But I was really interested. Like, I quite like the fact that the things look, you know, have a resemblance to the thing that they're made out of. Like, for me, it's the more they kind of go away and like don't look like that anymore, so they look like really professional puppets. And there's definitely a place for that in animation. Like, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I think for me it becomes less interesting, because I like the kind of like the fact that the materials might be quite tough to work with and they look like what they were originally, and I find that really interesting. And I think that kind of comes from my sculptural side. So you can see like things like the Sculpey and the wire. You can see the wire in the hands, and in the main puppet there's a beautiful articulated armature underneath there, which you do see a little bit on the wrists. But I kind of like, I quite like the fact that you can see what it's all made of. The hair is made of post-it notes, and then the person sat next to her on this shot, it's made out of the inside of envelopes with some florist's wire inside. And I have animated it, so when the character moves their head, there is a little bit of the hair moving, which I'm very proud of, because I didn't think it was going to work, because they can be quite stiff. So there is this kind of like, you know, an interplay between getting the puppets to do what you want, but also working within the limitations of the materials. And I think that that is a real part of this, the side of me that comes from the sculpture background, and makes it really interesting. So if the entire thing was made out of plasticine, that, you know, I wouldn't, you know, say no to that. But it's like a different set of limitations, but it wouldn't be as interesting to me because I like the different materials in there. We did have an idea as well with this library set that the books would be kind of like a folded piece of paper and with like prints on it, so it looked like lots of different books and we could just slot it in. But at the time when I was getting it ready, I just thought it's going to look rubbish like that. So we sat, and me and my daughter and my partner made hundreds and hundreds of tiny books, as you can see on the set there. Yeah, and then my daughter had to glue them all in because there was a slight bit of movement with the books. So we had to kind of be really patiently stick them all. And I was trying to use as much kind of like packaging in the recycling on the paper. So we had some nice kind of little bits of packaging that I was like, oh, this makes quite a nice book cover. And then the rest of it is kind of magazines. And then you can use I had some old foam boards. That's in the ones in the that you can see closer to the camera, and the other ones have got cardboard inside because you could bend the cardboard round. But if you can see the sides, it doesn't look like a book so much. It looks like a piece of bent cardboard. So you can't see the sides of those ones. They're snuck in the background. But I really wanted to kind of like have that reusing and like kind of giving something life, because I'm very aware of my kind of bio footprint. I think we all are now becoming well more aware of that. And I think as artists, we can be really wasteful. So I think probably with stop motion animators and with puppet makers, I think we do kind of look at stuff and think, oh, I could reuse this. This could have a new life as something else. So I've been quite excited to do that. Because I've used a lot of odd and different materials in the past, but I think I've really gelled with using the paper. It's been like quite fun, quite good fun.
Yeah, can we just show another example of you using paper, which is an example very close to our hearts, because you were the first stop motion animation commission. And so it's kind of nice because we've seen like an example of you working, and then maybe we can have a look at this as sort of an example of the finished piece. So you decided to use 2D paper in this example. You talk through that kind of decision and how you were framing this piece specifically.
I think I was really interested. I saw this award-winning animation with like an animator talking to his drawing, and the animator was in it and then talking to the drawing. The drawing was animated, and I was like, oh, I love the fact that you see the animator working. And I didn't want to have like the same story, but I was quite inspired to kind of like have the animator present as if I had made these little cutout pieces to send to the festival, and then they came to life in the room on their own, because essentially that's kind of what all animation is, isn't it? It's the inanimate coming to life when no one's looking. And then like I thought, because we have this kind of the cutting mat, I do like to use stuff like as its original, what it would be used for in life. I thought I'd make it a really nice background for the characters, and the characters are really lovely to cut out and have some great shapes involved with them. And also I didn't over joint them, so again, like kind of trying to stick to the original designs and keep with the kind of limitations of the movement of making them move, but kind of not over jointing them so that they kind of had a lot of movement, so that there's this they kind of stick to their own illustrative style, which I really enjoyed. And then to be honest with this one, all I kind of had in my head was that they come out of the paper bag and they start interacting, and then I just started animating and thought, well, what could they do? But I just kind of went with my instinct. So I knew I wanted objects to move as well in it. But the rest of it was just pure playing, so it was absolutely lovely. It's really nice.
It is interesting what you're saying as well about that kind of interaction of like what the puppet wants to do, and that kind of dialogue between the person and the material, and that even though these are separate pieces, they could be articulated in a way that looked really wrong. So there's still that kind of dance between the puppeteer, the animator, and the material.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's really interesting. I always find that there's a stage where you're working on something, because whenever I watch it back, I feel exactly like I did when I was making it, where there's points where I feel like, oh, this bit works really well, and there's other bits where I'm like, I really don't want to watch that bit because it didn't work the way I wanted it to, which I think is any artist, isn't it? You just kind of like look at things, and that's why you keep making it, because you're like, oh, I could have done that better, And there's loads of little things that as I'm watching it, I'm like, that I really love that bit. And when I originally made it, when the little character that was like a half-made puppet switched the light on, I didn't like this little character here and moves around and interacts. That was a nightmare to get it to move properly. But I actually quite liked the way it came out, and I like it's kind of like shabbiness. But at the time when I was making it, I was like, oh, they're going to be thinking, why have you used this? But it's just that kind of crisis that you have when you're like mid way through and you think, oh, is everything I'm making awful? Like, I can't tell. And I had that talk with my producer, came to have a look on set and take some photographs today. And she was like, are you okay? And last week I was kind of standing in my living room thinking, oh, what am I doing? I'm making just an utter mess. And she was like, what are you talking about? You know, you got to be more confident with yourself. But I think that's just part of the process. You kind of have a, you know, small
Yeah, I think,
crisis when you
yeah,
think it's all rubbish.
yeah. All artists have that. I'm no good. This is all rubbish.
Yeah,
We've got.
yeah. And then you get to the end and you're like, hey, it's brilliant. It's worked really well. What was I thinking? Or you think, oh no, it's terrible. I'm never going to show no one that.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in here. So, do you ever work in crossover with digital animation, or do you stick with stop motion?
I have done a bit of 2D animation. It's been very traditional, and that's mostly because I don't know how to use the software for the computer animation and digital animation, but I am not averse to using it at all. I think if I'm quite keen to learn. I know After Effects and would be. I'm quite keen to learn more about using After Effects with some of the more complex digital software. I am quite interested to see what the possibilities are. I'm not 100% bowled over by the look of it from a lot of the stuff that I've seen, but that's not to say that I couldn't work with it and work with it in a different way, because I think sometimes when people are working with it, they might have something in mind that looks like something that already exists, and I quite like to make stuff that looks a bit different so it looks like it's my work. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but like you might get an animator and they might make puppets and they all look like they're made by Aardman, and that's beautiful. And they might want to work at Aardman, and that's perfect because that's spot on. That's a good match. But I like to be independent, so I like my work to look like other people, not other people's, sorry, the opposite. And then, so I think with the digital, sometimes the way that I've seen it made is it looks similar to digital work that a big animation house is making. I have seen some quite nice, lovely independent stuff where obviously people have made the work, and I've looked at it and gone, how have they done that? That's amazing. So it would be about having the confidence, being like to go through and work with it. So I would like to look at it in the future, but also as well to take stop motion into digital and work at things like projection mapping and stuff like that, and also using stop motion in computer gaming, which I know has been done a couple of times and it seems to have worked really nicely. I'd love to have a go at that as well. So I think it's a nice crossover.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's such a different skill set, isn't it? And so, doing like stop motion, then it's like a completely different world. Doing some like CGI effects or something. So it's interesting. But then there's also that dialogue between, okay, when can we bring in physical, although it's still digital in a way, but bringing in kind of a physical object into something, and when might that be appropriate? And
Yeah, I've seen some nice stuff done with where people have, because we've got 3D scanners, so you can 3D scan something into a piece of software, and I'd be quite interested to try that out because obviously I like the sculpting process of making something, and then I don't know what would happen if I 3D scanned it and put it into a piece of software and then started working into it from that, whether I might lose it, because I think I'm very kind of, I have to engage in the process. It has to have something that's giving me back. I'm not somebody who can just keep going if I don't feel like it's working for me. But I'd like to try it because I think that could be quite interesting. And generally, I did use some games, get very basic game making software, and I loved it. I really enjoyed making it, but it's a very creative process. And for me, if it gets too technical and it moves away from, I feel like I'm creating something, then I start to kind of be like,
So we've got one more question here before we wrap up. So do you have any tips on how to get working in stop motion animation?
Yeah, I mean, what most people will ask for is, so if you go for any companies, they will want to see a show reel. A show reel always starts somewhere. So even if you're just like right at the basics, you can do loads on phones and iPads. What you want to do is to kind of think about which part of the stop motion process that you're really interested in, because often the people that make puppets and the really articulated jointed puppets aren't always the people that do the animation. So think about what part of it is that it really appeals to you. And then look at some of those cheap or free softwares. I think it's like Stop Motion Pro and Stop Motion Studio that you can put on your phone, and you can kind of like look at doing some like quite fine pieces of detailed work, and see if there's anything that you kind of feel like is show reel worthy. And you don't necessarily have to be making loads of sets. You can do things like with the moving parts trailer, it was like interacting with things on the desk, so you can be quite flexible around, oh, what might I play with to make things happen. And then you need to like have a little bit of a selection on your show reel that shows off some of your skills, but also like join loads of networking groups. There's some really good ones in Instagram and on Facebook. So there's like Stop Motion, I think it's called Stop Motion Animators on Facebook, and there's one on Instagram that shows a lot of like little bits and pieces, and it's people from all different levels and get feedback and advice from other animators. And if you can find any like online tutorials, watch those as well, and just kind of like build yourself a little portfolio. But ask people for feedback. People are generally quite kind about it until you feel like you're at a stage where you might kind of get in touch with someone and say, hey, have you need anybody to come and help do this? And like, you know, there's a Geordie saying, shy Ben's getting out. And I think that's sometimes you just have to give it a go, you know, and see where you can go from there. And of course, you can come and study at Teesside University. I can say that. And I'll teach you it all.
Little plug, if you great tutors there. So just quickly, where can people find you? And specifically, this new project, where can we see that? Where can we find more about that?
It won't be out till Christmas, December, because it has a lot of work to be done. It has to be shot, and then there'll be the soundtrack and everything. And then it'll be released. It'll probably go for a festival release. Yeah, the producers will be doing all of that stuff because they're amazing, and they'll make sure that it gets a nice, you know, getting out into the world. I've got a website called Lesley-anne-Rose.com. You can see some past work on there. I did a lovely little animation yesterday with one of the animators I'm working with now. Last year, the Two Halves music video for Richard Dawson. I'm particularly proud of that, but also my animator that's working on this one, who is amazing, did some gorgeous pieces of animation in that. So you might be familiar with that. I know some people have seen it. And yeah, so, you know, I've got like, to the person who was saying, how do I get work in stop motion animation? Like the first one I did was on the bedroom floor with some puppets. I had no clue what I was doing. And then the soundtrack was done by me, and it's terrible. But I did it. And then after that, I was like, well, I can see what needs to be done to make it better. So I just kept going. So there's stuff in my back catalogue that now I look back on it and I think, ooh.
Right. You can plan forever, can't you? You can.
Yeah. And also you've just got to keep kind of building and being like, okay, make this one, and I think this one will be better. Yeah. And I think that's the way to just keep thinking about it. Like, what can I make next, and how can I make it a bit better?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been
really great,
really insightful. So that's Lesley-anne Rose. So if you enjoyed the talk today, please do help us cover the costs running this event by making a donation. The link to donate is movingpartsarts.com/donate, or you can click the handy donate here button if you're joining us on Crowdcast. Suggested donation for this event is £8, but please do give whatever you can afford. Every little bit counts, and we can't fund this work without your support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.